Centuries before Magellan's ships appeared on the horizon, the Philippines was already a thriving land of warriors, traders, and rulers shaping their own destiny. It was a land where gold flowed through the hands of artisans, where boats crossed vast seas long before European explorers even knew these islands existed. Powerful barangays controlled trade, forging alliances with China, India, and Indonesia. Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism had already left their mark, blending with deep-rooted animist traditions. Tondo ruled the bustling trade routes of Manila Bay, while Sulu's warriors sailed far and wide, feared and respected in equal measure. And in the south, the Bruneian Sultanate was carving out its own influence, changing the balance of power. So when the Spanish arrived in 1521, did they truly discover the Philippines, or did they simply stumble upon a civilization far older than their own? The Philippines, over 7,000 islands scattered across the vast Pacific Ocean. Some are so small that they barely hold a single village, while others stretch for miles, rich with mountains, forests, and rivers. This wasn't just a collection of islands, it was a world of its own. And long before European explorers arrived, these lands had already been home to humans for thousands of years, witnessing migration, trade, and the rise of unique cultures. But living in this part of the world came with a challenge. The Philippines sits right on the Ring of Fire, a zone around the Pacific where the Earth's crust is relentless, constantly shifting and grinding. The result? Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis. These weren't rare events. They shaped life here, sometimes destroying entire communities, other times creating new land as lava cooled and hardened into rock. But this relentless earth also gave something valuable: gold, copper, and iron. Early Filipinos didn't just survive in this environment, they thrived, learning how to mine and trade these resources with nearby civilizations. Despite having so many islands, only about 1,000 of them were ever settled. Most of the others were too small or too rocky or too remote. The ones that were inhabited, however, formed three main island groups: Luzon in the north, the Visayas in the center, and Mindanao in the south. Each of these regions had its own unique culture, trade connections, and way of life. Luzon, the largest and most populated island, would later become the political and economic heart of the country. It was home to bustling trade hubs, including what is now Manila, the future capital. But long before the cities and kingdoms, humans were already walking these lands. Fossil evidence tells us that modern humans, our direct ancestors, arrived in the Philippines around 47,000 years ago. They weren't the first. Before them, other human species had already lived here. Scientists discovered the remains of Homo luzonensis, a now extinct species of early humans, who lived around 134,000 years ago in Luzon, and before that, Homo erectus, an even older human ancestor, left behind evidence that they were in the Philippines as early as 700,000 years ago. But where did the ancestors of today's Filipinos come from? They weren't originally from the islands. Around 3000 BCE, a wave of migrants arrived from Taiwan and other nearby islands. These people, known as the Austronesians, were master sailors. They built boats strong enough to cross vast oceans, traveling from island to island, settling new lands. They didn't stop in the Philippines either. Austronesian culture spread from Madagascar in Africa to the islands of Hawaii, New Zealand, and even as far as Easter Island in the Pacific. The languages spoken in the Philippines today, including Tagalog, Cebuano, and Ilocano, all trace their roots back to this Austronesian family. And it wasn't just language. These early Filipinos brought farming, boat building, and complex social structures that shaped the way life developed on the islands. At first, settlements were small and scattered, mostly near rivers and coastlines where food was easier to find. The geography of the Philippines, with its mountains and forests, kept many of these early villages isolated from one another. Instead of forming a single, unified kingdom, different communities developed their own identities. But this didn't mean they were disconnected. Trade between villages and with other countries was already happening as early as 2000 BCE. How do we know? Archaeologists have found jade artifacts in the Philippines, beautiful green stone carvings used in jewelry and tools. But jade isn't found naturally in the Philippines. The pieces match jade from Taiwan, China, and Vietnam, meaning early Filipinos were a part of a vast trade network. And it wasn't just jade. They traded gold, pearls, and iron, and learned advanced metalworking techniques from Indian traders. This long-distance trading route is known today as the Maritime Jade Road. It lasted for nearly 3,000 years, connecting the Philippines to the larger world. And here's something interesting. Archaeological evidence suggests that, despite all this trading, the Philippines saw very little warfare during this period. Unlike other regions where empires rose and fell in bloody battles, the early history of the Philippines appears to have been mostly peaceful. By around 900 CE, things started changing. Trade continued to grow, and written history finally appeared. The earliest known written record in the Philippines, called the Laguna Copperplate inscription, dates back to this time. But instead of recording a war or a great ruler, it was about something surprisingly relatable: forgiving a debt. This document shows that early Filipinos had legal systems and organized societies, where debts and disputes were officially handled. By this time, the people of the islands had already begun organizing themselves into barangays, which were small independent communities led by a datu or chieftain. Some barangays were tiny, with only a few families. Others had hundreds of people. Some banded together into alliances, forming confederations. Leadership wasn't always inherited. Sometimes a datu gained power through skill in battle, wealth, or in trade, or alliances through marriage. In some areas, especially those with close ties to India, the local rulers adopted the title Raja, which was similar to a king. Later, as Islam spread through the region, some rulers were called sultans, a title that came from the Middle East. Life in these barangays was structured around class. At the top were the Maganu, a noble class who often served as leaders. Below them were the Maharlika, warriors who had some privileges but were not considered nobles. The Timawa were free people who worked in farming and trade, while at the lowest level were the Alipin, or slaves. But unlike in other parts of the world, slavery in the Philippines wasn't permanent. Alipin could work their way up and even buy their freedom. Even though different barangays had their own traditions, they shared common religious beliefs. Early Filipinos followed animism, a belief that spirits existed in everything: trees, rivers, mountains, and even the wind. They worshipped ancestors, believing that the spirits of the dead could bring blessings or misfortune. Some people, known as Babaylan, acted as spiritual leaders. They were highly respected and often believed to have healing powers or the ability to communicate with the spirit world. For centuries, this way of life continued, with communities growing, trading, and adapting. But as foreign traders continued arriving, first from China and India, and later from the Middle East, new ideas and religions slowly started to take root. And while many parts of early Philippine history remains a mystery, a few places stand out, giving us a clearer picture of what life was like before the Europeans arrived. One of the most important early political centers was Tondo, a powerful barangay located at the mouth of the Pasig River in what is now Manila Bay. It was a thriving trade hub, controlling the flow of goods between the islands and the rest of Asia. Right next to it was Maynila, another independent barangay that shared control of this valuable trade network. Together, they became rich and powerful by controlling the trade of luxury goods like gold, pearls, and spices, which were highly sought after in China and Southeast Asia. How important was this trade? Important enough that even the Chinese emperor of the Ming dynasty took notice. Under the rule of the Yongle Emperor, a Chinese governor was assigned to oversee trade with the Philippines, ensuring that the flow of goods between China and these islands remained strong. This connection with China wasn't unique to Tondo and Maynila. Much of what we know about pre-colonial Philippines comes from Chinese records, which describe thriving trade relationships between the islands and powerful Asian kingdoms, including Japan, Champa, which is modern-day Vietnam, and India. But Tondo's dominance didn't last forever. By the early 1500s, its influence had begun to fade. A new rising power, known as the Luzons, emerged in its place. The Luzons were known for their strong military culture, and they didn't just fight in the Philippines. They became mercenaries and warriors for hire in battles across Indonesia, Malaysia, and even mainland Asia. Some fought for their own people, while others worked for foreign rulers. They were fierce, adaptable, and willing to go where the fight took them. Meanwhile, in the south, another great power was rising, the Sultanate of Sulu. The people of Sulu, located in the Mindanao region, had long been traders and sailors, moving goods across the region. But their influence truly grew in the 12th and 13th centuries, when groups from the Visayas migrated south and settled in the Sulu archipelago. They established a strong state and engaged in trade with their neighbors, including the powerful Champa kingdom. Not all of these interactions were peaceful. In the 12th century, a conflict broke out between the people of Sulu and Champa, a Vietnamese kingdom that was also active in maritime trade. But whatever tensions existed were short-lived. Trade soon resumed, and Sulu continued to prosper. However, by the 13th century, control over the region shifted once again. Chinese records indicate that during this time, Sulu, along with Manila and Maay, came under the rule of the Bruneian Sultanate. While it's unclear how long this lasted, Sulu eventually regained its independence, and by the 15th century was being ruled by Raja Baguinda, who had converted to Islam. Sulu wasn't the only kingdom influenced by outside cultures. On the island of Mindanao, another powerful state had emerged, the Rajanate of Butuan. This kingdom was unique. While most of its people practiced Hinduism, its rulers followed Buddhism. The people of Butuan were highly skilled in goldworking, crafting elaborate jewelry and religious artifacts. They also had strong ties with China and other Southeast Asian kingdoms, exchanging goods and cultural influences for centuries. But Butuan, Sulu, and Tondo weren't the only independent states. There were many smaller polities spread across the islands, each with its own distinct culture and trade networks. One of these was Cabollian, a barangay that was heavily influenced by China and Japan. How do we know? Because people there followed cultural customs like blackening their teeth, a practice that was common in Japan at the time. Other polities, like Maay and Palalu, were known for their trade partnerships with China, which made them important players in regional commerce. Not all interactions between the Philippines and its Asian neighbors were peaceful. There are records of conflicts between the Visayans and coastal towns in China, suggesting that Filipinos may have launched raids or attacks on foreign settlements. But whether through trade, migration, or warfare, the Philippines remained connected to the broader world, constantly shifting and evolving. Then, late in the 1400s, the balance of power shifted again. The Bruneian Sultanate, eager to expand its influence in the region, pushed into the Philippines once more. Their target? Tondo and Manila Bay. Their goal? To break the monopoly Tondo and Manila had on Chinese trade. And in 1500, they succeeded. The Bruneians established Selarong, also known as the Kingdom of Manila, as a vassal state, meaning it was still ruled by local leaders but under Brunei's control. To strengthen their grip on the region, Sultan Bakia of Brunei married into the ruling family of Sulu, connecting these two powerful sultanates through both politics and bloodlines. At this point, the Philippines was a land of independent states, powerful trade networks, and diverse cultural influences, but everything was about to change. In 1521, a fleet of Spanish ships arrived, led by a Portuguese navigator sailing for Spain, Ferdinand Magellan. This was the first official contact between Europeans and the people of the Philippines. On March 14, 1521, Magellan's expedition anchored off Suluan Island in the central part of the archipelago. Soon after, they landed on Hominhan Island, where they met with the local rulers, including Raja Humabon of Cebu. What followed was one of the most pivotal moments in Philippine history. Raja Humabon and his people converted to Catholicism, marking the first mass conversion to Christianity in the islands. But not everyone welcomed the Spanish with open arms. Datula Pulapu, the local chieftain from Mactan, refused to submit to Spanish rule. On April 27, 1521, Magellan and his men landed on Mactan, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they were met with fierce resistance. Lapulapu's warriors launched a relentless attack, and in the heat of battle, Magellan himself was killed. With their leader dead and their forces weakened, the Spanish retreated. Their first attempt to conquer the Philippines had failed, but this was far from the end. Spain wouldn't return for another 40 years, but when they did, they came back with a plan, one that would change the islands forever. And that's the history of the Philippines before Magellan. From ancient trade networks to powerful barangays, these islands were already thriving long before Europeans arrived. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. And let us know down in the comments, what do you think was the most interesting part of pre-colonial Philippine history? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.